Fear Zone, your horror channel. Good evening, everyone, and now let's get to today's story, which is about Mr. Yanni, and it happened to him in the city of Topeka, which is in the United States, and at that time it was in the year 2016. Mr. Yanni was 45 years old. And today, I'm going to tell you what I went through, and the scare of meeting a werewolf, in which I had to fight with this creature to save one of my family members. I live in a village far away from the city. One day, as usual, I went to get some bread at the grocery store early in the day, and as soon as I passed a dirt road on the way, I saw a dead dog on the ground. I looked at the animal and realized that the cause of its death was certainly the bite marks of some large beast that had attacked it. I left it at that and carried on walking to the grocery store, and then I bought my bread there. So when I was walking back along the dirt road again, I heard a man picking up the body of the dead dog from the road, and he dragged the corpse into the woods. And after that, which was a very strange thing, I went back to my house. Then I went to work and forgot all about it. A few days later, I was driving home from work in the evening, and I passed that street where there was a dead dog on the road, and that same suspicious guy who pulled the dog's corpse into the woods, and he was walking near a vacant lot, wearing a red shirt. I wondered what that guy was doing at that time, in that dark place. And then I got to my house and saw that my daughter wasn't at home, and my wife told me that she had gone to one of her friends' houses and that the girl would be home soon. At that moment, I remembered that strange guy near the bush. I was already worried, thinking about the guy, who could be some maniac. With that, it gave me a bad feeling, so I took my car. I went to the house of this friend of my daughter, but when I got there, she told me that my daughter had just left. My mind was already racing, so I went to the road where I'd seen that guy in the red shirt prowling around at night. And when I got to the road, I saw something strange in the bushes beside the road. There was a huge animal on 4 legs, and it was eating something on the ground near some bushes, but that it was my daughter, who could have been attacked by this beast. I didn't even want to think about it, but in desperation, I got out of my car quickly to try to see what that animal was eating, and I picked up several stones on the ground and threw them at the creature. And the creature ran growling in pain, frightened, but the beast recovered quickly. This creature got up and stood up like a man. But then it quickly crouched down and stood on 4 legs and would run after me. At that moment, I had no doubt that it was a werewolf, because not only could it stand on 2 legs, but it also had a strange gleam in its eyes. And what I did was to run back to the street and quickly get into my car, but then the creature came up to my car, and it stood up again, and this beast was very furious, and began to hit the bodywork of my vehicle very violently. I quickly reversed the car and tried to run over the werewolf, throwing my vehicle on top of it, but the creature managed to run in time and saved itself from the blow. I turned the car around and tried to run over the werewolf, but the beast ran away through the woods. Well, by this time, I was more worried about what the beast was eating in the woods, and for me, it could have been my daughter, so even though I was frightened by the sight of the werewolf, I still wasn't going to leave that place at all, until I saw what that animal had caught. And the problem with all this was that I couldn't see what that beast had caught, because the bushes in the middle of the vegetation were a bit high, and it was dark in there. So, I waited in the car with the headlights on, and looked in the direction of where the werewolf was eating something, but the creature had already disappeared. After a few minutes, to my surprise, I heard some noises in the undergrowth, and that's when suddenly, the creature ran fast towards what he was eating. I even got out of the car scared not to let that beast get close, but the werewolf took in his mouth by the bush the body of some little piglet, and ran in the vegetation and disappeared. Seeing that, I felt calmer at that moment, because I was glad it wasn't my daughter. Even though I was worried, I got back to my house quickly, and when I arrived at my home, I saw my daughter in the kitchen, so that gave me some relief, and of course, I told her what had happened to me on the road, when I had almost been caught by the werewolf going after her, and this story also served to stop this girl from walking around late at night. However, I spent the whole night thinking about this werewolf, and also that this creature had caught my daughter. I was very worried about this macabre creature walking around my neighborhood. And finally, when the day dawned, I decided to go back to the Werewolves Road to see if I could do anything against this beast, and arriving at that dirt road, I saw some pieces of the body of the little pig that the werewolf had been eating at dawn, and after a while there, I was already leaving, and that's when I saw a gentleman coming out of the middle of the forest with some clothes in his hands, and this man came to talk to me. He was a farmer from the region. At first, this man told me that he was looking for a guy who had started appearing in the woods during the day and at night around the village, and this country bumpkin thought that it was him who had taken one of his pigs. This man walked through the woods, and the only clue he found was the clothes he found thrown in the undergrowth, and looking closer, I saw that it was a red shirt, and the guy I found in the woods last night, before the werewolf appeared, was certainly wearing those clothes. The landowner said that he was going to chase this suspicious guy, and after this conversation I had with this gentleman, I went back to my house and kept thinking about this whole story. When a few days had passed, I started to think more about that wanderer who was prowling the woods, and the old country bumpkin who found his clothes, and for me, that guy was already suspected of becoming the werewolf who attacked me on the road. After a few days, I met that redneck again, and he told me something strange, that he had found several dead dogs hidden in the woods, and that these dogs had been killed by attacks from some dangerous beast that was in the woods in the area. I became more suspicious of that suspect, who I saw taking that dead dog from the road, and for me, he was hiding the evidence that there was a werewolf in the neighborhood. Well, I even tried to see if I could find this guy when I was driving through the streets of my neighborhood, but I never saw him again. The point is that these werewolves do exist, and their attacks are very violent, and I say that because I've lived through these moments of terror with this creature. And also those dogs that were killed by some animal on the road, I think it was the werewolf that attacked them. And that was my real horror story. Thanks for watching the video, and if you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Fear Zone, your channel for real horror stories. Good evening everyone, and now we're going to today's story, which is about Mr. Andrade, and it happened to him in the city of Bage, which is in Brazil, and at that time, in 1994, Mr. Andrade was 40 years old. And before I start this story, I'm going to warn you that this story is about a policeman, and that nowadays, he's already retired. Well then, let's move on to today's story. Hello everyone, and I'm going to tell you about one of my police incidents, in which I had an experience with some real vampires. And it all starts like this. One night a few decades ago, I was on patrol with my police partner with a car, near the rural area of the city, and suddenly the central radio called us and ordered me and my partner to go to a place to investigate a case of a girl who would have been killed near a ranch. However, I learned from the police station that it was a landowner who had made this report, and that this man was passing through the forest, and that's when he saw a guy in black clothes sticking a wooden stake through a girl's chest, and then this man ran away scared and fled into a thicket and disappeared from the scene. After this information, we went around some rural villages until we arrived at the place indicated where the girl's body was, so we started to look at the body of this young woman, who was a teenager, and we noticed by the state of her body that something was very strange. The girl's skin was a very gray color, and several veins appearing all over her body, and it looked like she'd been dead for days. And what was also strange was the way this teenager was murdered with a wooden stake driven through her chest, and I'd never seen anything like it. And of course, as I've watched a lot of vampire movies in my life, I kept thinking about the maniac who did this tragedy. Anyway, we reported it to the police station, and they said they would send a team to investigate the case. But it didn't take long, and soon the coroners arrived on the scene and the technical police, and they began to study the girl's body. After a while, the police station gave an order for everyone to leave the scene, and it was just me and my police partner, and the coroners and the technical police, so they left. But then other coroners arrived, and it was around 6 o'clock in the morning, and these people were from the government. But something started to happen at that moment, because as the day was dawning, and with the rays of the sun, the body of the girl with the stake in her chest started to smoke, but suddenly the body started to catch fire on its own. And at that time these people from the government put the body in a quick black bag and put it in an ambulance, and these people said that we could leave now, and that they would solve this case from then on. Well, I went back to the police station and spoke to my deputy. He told me that this was a very confidential matter, and that we shouldn't report it to anyone, and that this story would have to remain a secret, because the girl was so serious that only the government knew how to deal with this kind of situation. And after a few days, I ended up calling one of the police coroners who had been on the case before the government arrived, to see what he thought of the whole thing, because he had also seen the dead girl, and this coroner told me something very strange. Because a little test he did on the dead girl's body, he said that this teenager would have been dead for more than 7 days, or even more than that, and he didn't understand how her body had suffered almost no decomposition, and this coroner didn't understand how the landowner would have seen this girl alive and being murdered today. And this coroner also said that the victim's body didn't reach any autopsy body in the city because he thought that the government people took the body for them. In that conversation, I didn't say anything about the dead girl who caught fire on her own when she arrived during the day, and I was also confused by all this, because I had also seen the corpse, and thinking about this information, about how a girl with that appearance, the landowner said that he had seen this young woman alive before he was caught by the maniac, because to me, her body seemed to have been dead for a long time, as the technical police told me. I began to suspect that the girl could even be a vampire. But the fact is, after a few days, my deputy called me and introduced me to a man who was a priest, and that it was for me and my partner to do an investigation together with this man from the church, but it was a secret and confidential mission. And so I agreed. So one day around 4 o'clock in the morning, and my partner and I got into this priest's car, and we went to a rural area far from the city. Anyway, after driving through some dirt roads and dark places, we arrived at a point on the road, and so the priest stopped his car, and as soon as we got out of the vehicle, we walked about 100 meters to an old and ancient ranch. And the strange thing was that the woods inside this property were dry and many plants were withered, and the trees were leafless, but around this ranch the woods were normal. The priest told us to turn off our flashlights in the place, because it could be very dangerous. So, we went inside this macabre ranch, and in the backyard, we saw a big old house inside the property, and we went around the back of the house, and we saw that there was a kind of family cemetery at the back, and the priest, seeing that we knew what this mission was about, decided to tell us a bit about what was going on, and the priest told us what I had already suspected, and to our surprise, he was hunting a vampire who would possibly be living on this ranch, because of the girl who had turned up dead nearby, and also that this creature would possibly be nearby, because only the woods inside the ranch were dry, but around this property the woods were normal, and that this meant that there was a vampire nearby. Well, I was frightened by this story, that we were after a vampire, and I even thought that it might be some kind of prank on me and my partner, but then the priest surprised us, and he told us that the girl who was killed with the wooden stake was the one who did it. Then the priest opened his bag and showed us some wooden stakes. Of course, I was confused, but I was already suspicious of that girl, and the priest said that she was a vampire, and that's why he stuck the stake in the young woman. We also saw that inside the bag there were some strange glass bottles. But apart from all that, we stayed hidden around the place, just watching to see if anything appeared. However, when it was close to 5 o'clock in the morning, my partner saw something on top of a tree, and when I looked it seemed to be a figure of a person climbing down the branches, but with unusual agility, and it jumped from the trunk to the ground, and it seemed that its body was so light that it floated. At that moment, I shuddered with fear, and I began to think that this vampire story might be true, but anyway, the guy who came down from the tree seemed to be a man, but he had an evil presence, and you could feel it from afar. But what happened was that this stranger walked to the cemetery on the site, and then he opened the lid of one of the tombs, and went in there, and then he closed that lid. At this point, the priest gave me a small glass bottle with some liquid in it, and he told me to pass it around the old house, and the priest also threw this liquid around the vampire's grave, and then we started to hear some moans and screams inside this catacomb, and the priest told us to wait until it was daylight, and only then would we go in there. As time passed, it soon began to get light, and we removed the lid of the tomb, and we saw that there was a passage to a crypt under the cemetery, so the priest and I went down to this place, and my partner stood guarding the tomb from the outside, and of course, I went with my gun in my hands, and I was very scared of what I was going to face, but in this hiding place of the creature, there was a strange coffin standing against the wall, and what was inside made a noise, so the priest put some ribbons of rope around the coffin and secured it, but suddenly the thing that we had secured inside the coffin started banging on the coffin in order to escape. The priest quickly took a crucifix from his pocket and put it on the lid of the coffin, and at that moment the creature stopped banging on the lid, but the creature started moaning in pain. At that moment, the priest and I dragged the coffin out of the crypt and took it outside to the ranch yard. But to my amazement, the priest opened the lid of the coffin, and I saw that there was a man inside. He seemed to be the guy who came floating down from the tree, but the fact is that he started screaming, and a lot of smoke came out of his body, and he was sure to catch fire just like the girl. Well, this being couldn't get out of the coffin, but the priest poured a liquid from a bottle on this creature, and the body of this vampire caught fire. I was very surprised to see all this. I was amazed that such a creature existed, and I was thinking various things that these vampires and the other races of evil such as werewolves and witches may also exist in the occult of this world. And in fact, the priest had thrown holy water on the creature. Then, after the body was burned, the priest cut the vampire up, and then he kept the parts of the vampire in black bags, and then we put these bags with the parts of the creature inside the car, and so we left that terrifying place. But along the way, This priest, the vampire hunter, said that he was from a church group and that they had been after this vampire for over 40 years and had only just managed to find him. He told us that there are many more of these creatures scattered all over Brazil and even the world, and because of today's human technology, they live in hiding, but these creatures sometimes make a victim. As we were driving away, I got very scared along the way, and sometimes looked in those bags where the vampire's body was, and this man from the church asked us to always look when we passed that house, to see if there was anything strange there, or if the woods were still withered, and the trees dry, because that was one of the signs that evil was around, because if the woods were dry, there might be a vampire living nearby. Anyway, after that incident, I went back to my house, and the priest took the creature with him in his car, and the deputy didn't even make a record of it. Well, after a while, I didn't see that priest again, and I drove around during the day near where we caught that vampire, and at the creature's ranch. Thankfully, the woods and trees, which were dry, returned to normal as if by magic. But then I thought that if I had to face a being like that, I could lose the fight, because I didn't know the weaknesses of a vampire, and this monster would beat me, but thankfully the priest was with us, and we managed to catch the vampire. But also, the priest told me and my partner a little about the history of these vampires, in which these creatures escaped from Europe during the Second World War, because many ideologues wanted to carry out macabre experiments with these vampires, and many of these beings were caught and decimated mainly in Germany and other countries, but nowadays, these vampires have almost become legend anyway. All I know is that I never want to see a creature like this in front of me again. Well guys, and I warn you, if you see an abandoned house or ranch with dry vegetation and trees, there may be a vampire there, and that was my real horror story. Thank you for watching my video, and if you liked it, subscribe to the channel and leave your like, and activate notifications to receive new videos.